What if you were just a shadow of someone who crawled out of the sea? What if the blood in your veins carried whispers from creatures long extinct?
This isn't just a story about evolution, it's a story about you, in the deep silence before memory,
Before language,
before fire. Something stirred in the mud, blinked against the sun, and began a journey that would take millions of years.
from single cells to star-gazing minds, from crawling to conquering. This is how we
Became human. Close your eyes now, and let's go back to the beginning.
What if they never truly disappeared? Not into extinction, not into silence, not entirely.
What if the Neanderthals, those ancient cousins whose shadows flicker on the cave walls of our past, are not gone at all, but simply dissolved into the marrow of who we are? It begins as a quiet question, a whisper that doesn't echo but hums just beneath the surface of thought. We breathe it in without knowing. We carry it without asking.
Not because we remember them,
But because something in us still behaves as if we do. In the strands of our DNA, there are ghost fragments.
tiny molecular footprints that drift across the double helix like half-erased memories. Some of us carry only traces.
Others carry more, a shared lineage, coiled deep in the spiral of our cells, that never made its way into stories or songs, but exists nonetheless, etched in protein and bone.
Scientists call it interbreeding. Others call it hybrid legacy.
But maybe, just maybe, it's something softer than science knows how to name, because Neanderthals are not the strangers we were once taught to believe.
For a long time, we imagined them as clumsy, mute, almost monstrous stooped shadows of ourselves, waiting to vanish.
But that story, like so many others told from a distance, is being rewritten by hands that hold fossils gently, and eyes that look with less pride and more curiosity.
Their tools were careful.
Their fires were constant. Their children were loved not in the cool hush of deep caves and the undisturbed soil of ancient riverbanks. Their remains surface like the beginnings of a sentence we forgot how to finish. We find skulls that held large, complex brains. We find pollen near bones, perhaps placed
In burial,
we find pigment, tools,
purpose, and still, we find silence. So much silence.
not the kind that empties, but the kind that makes you lean in.
Listen harder. Wonder longer. Could it be that our fascination with Neanderthals is not about them, but about us?
About what it means to outlive your kin, to become the only reflection left in a once crowded mirror.
If they hadn't faded, would we still feel so alone in the human story?
Would our triumph feel less like destiny and more like something accidentally?
Branching path that broke left when it could have broken right.
Perhaps this is why the question lingers, because extinction isn't always absolute. It's not a single point on a timeline. It's a thinning,
A quieting. A presence that turns to impression, like a footprint in drying mud.
you can still see the shape, still sense the weight.
Maybe the Neanderthals are not missing from our
World,
Maybe they are simply hidden in plain sight, scattered within us, like embers banked beneath the ash. What if some of the ways we move, or grieve, or dream are not entirely ours?
what if a Neanderthal ancestor breathes quietly through the way our bodies react to cold, or how we perceive pain, or how we sometimes feel haunted by things we cannot name?
What if they passed on something invisible, something that has nothing to do with tools or bones, but everything to do with instinct and intuition?
Could we still be sharing space with them in the smallest, softest ways?
Not side by side, but layered within, memory as biology, presence as echo.
Not because they were weaker and vanished, but because they were close enough to blend, to mix, to become part of something new.
Not gone, not lost, just folded into us. And if we are willing
To listen gently, if we treat the silence with respect instead of conquest, maybe we'll find that their story didn't end where the textbooks said it did.
maybe the end of the Neanderthals was not a vanishing, but a merging. Maybe the chapter closed not with a period, but with a comma, and yet.
If this much can be carried in silence, in blood, in bone,
What else might we find, buried in frost and shadow, waiting to be remembered? The snow does not speak, but it remembers.
beneath layers of frost and silence, it guards secrets older than any language. And when it begins to thaw just a little, just enough, it reveals pieces of
A forgotten past, bones curled in fetal positions,
skulls bearing marks not of violence, but of care.
fingers folded over rib cages as if still dreaming beneath the earth. We often imagine ancient remains scattered randomly, as if life in the deep past was chaotic, devoid of meaning or ritual.
But Neanderthal burials tell another story, one that
Is strangely tender.
painfully human. In the Shanida cave, Buried under centuries of rock in northern Iraq, the remains of multiple Neanderthals were found, lying together.
as if purposefully placed.
One known to us only as Shanidar 4 was buried with clusters of ancient pollen, concentrated around the body in ways that suggest more than chance. Did someone place flowers beside the body before the cave sealed shut? Were petals scattered?
Over a loved one.
Or perhaps arranged with care?
It's not proof,
But it is a possibility, and possibility is the first breath of empathy. Not far from there, another body tells an even more haunting tale. A Neanderthal who suffered injuries so severe he must have needed constant help, a crushed foot, partial blindness, and one
arm missing. And yet, he lived for years, not abandoned, not discarded, but protected, carried,
fed.
tended to.
In a world where survival meant constant struggle, his presence speaks volumes. These weren't just wild beings, they were caregivers.
They were companions, the soil doesn't lie.
It holds what we forget.
In France, at La Chapelle-aux-Saints, another skeleton was found, this one cradled in a shallow pit, limbs neatly positioned.
Was it a grave?
A ritual?
Or simply the instinct to return the body to the earth in some gentle way? There are no carved headstones, no epitaphs, but in the placement of bones, in the stillness of their final pose, there's a message.
One that doesn't need words. For centuries, these clues were dismissed.
We didn't want to believe they meant anything.
Perhaps because acknowledging the emotional world of Neanderthals makes our own reflection less unique.
If they mourned, if they honored their dead, if they loved, then what truly separates us?
And yet, it's the shape of their skulls that
captures so much attention. The heavy brows, the wide noses, the long, low brain cases.
to us, they look unfamiliar.
But not alien.
In fact, they resemble someone you might have seen in a dream or across a fire long ago.
Like family distant.
Yes, but not forgotten. We have to ask, when a Neanderthal mother lost a child, did she cry?
Did she wail into the night? Or did she simply sit in silence, letting the fire burn down, remembering the sound of tiny feet in the soil? Did she lay a stone beside the small body not because someone taught her to, but because it felt?
Right.
Because loss demands some gesture, however small.
These aren't fantasies. They're invitations.
Invitations to imagine a people not as shadows in our ancestry, but as voices quiet, fractured, nearly gone, still whispering through stone and bone and eyes. In some sites, Neanderthal bones are found marked not by decay, but by intention, scrapes that may have come from tools.
Not violence.
Perhaps these were part of ritual defleshing, or perhaps they were acts of reverence we don't yet understand. To us, they seem brutal, but so much of history is misunderstood when seen through modern eyes. What if their understanding of death
Was not that it was an end, but a return? A rejoining with the land, the air, the snow? What if every burial wasn't just a goodbye?
but a promise? There's a kind of ache that rises when we see those skeletons lying so still, not because they are strange,
But because they are familiar.
a reminder that even 60,000 years ago, in the bitter cold of prehistory, someone knelt beside a loved one and felt the heaviness of grief. We tend to believe the past is cold, but perhaps it was never the snow that was cold.
Only the silence we've placed around it. We walk now into the red glow of ancient hearths, not lit for thousands of years, yet somehow still warm in our imagination.
If you close your eyes, you might feel them to flickers of orange light against a cave wall, shadows swaying with
The quiet rhythm of breath and life.
somewhere in that flicker. Neanderthals once sat, huddled close, watching the same flame we'd watched today, their minds perhaps heavy with thought, or light with story.
The fire didn't just warm their bodies, it warmed their identity, because in the heart of fire lies the heart of us.
Fire was never just utility,
It was memory,
repetition.
ceremony, and the Neanderthals knew this, not just as a species, surviving cold nights, but as a people forming rituals around light and warmth.
Archaeologists have uncovered circles of scorched earth, blackened bones, and burned wooden tools. These aren't just marks of survival, they are signs of presence.
Signs of place. They tell us the Neanderthals didn't merely pass through time, they stayed in it. But here's the unsettling thought. What stories were told beside that fire?
That we never heard. What wisdom vanished in smoke? Were there lullabies hummed in unknown tongues? Were there words for love or for loss, now buried under millennia of frost and forgetting?
Some researchers believe Neanderthals may have passed their knowledge not just through observation, but through a form of language. Not written, no, but perhaps vocal, rhythmic, patterned. Imagine sitting beside them and hearing low murmurs over crackling flames. You wouldn't understand the words, but you'd feel the weight of meaning. Something ancient, something familiar.
A reminder that communication isn't only about vocabulary, it's about presence.
About intent, about the pause between words. There's
a site in Spain, El Cid where remains of a Neanderthal family lie hidden in limestone.
In that limestone, there are signs of red ochre, crushed berries, bits of carved bone.
Was this mourning? Celebration? Decoration?
We don't know, but the fire was there too, ash and char woven into the soil, laid like fingerprints we
can't quite read. It's as if the fire wanted to tell us something.
But it only left behind echoes. Neanderthals likely tended to their fires with care. Not every group mastered fire from scratch.
Many carried embers from place to place, tucked
into bark or moss.
They understood how delicate the flame was, how quickly it could vanish if forgotten. There's something almost spiritual in that. The act of carrying light through darkness. Isn't that what all of us do, in some way? Hold on to something
fragile and hope it lasts the night.
Their tools, found near these hearths, also speak. Scrapers worn down by repeated use. Hand axes shaped with intention. Some even show signs of hafting, attaching stone to wood with binding and resin.
This isn't primitive. This is craft. And where there's craft, there's thought. And where there's thought, there's memory. So why do we still whisper about Neanderthals as if they were lesser? Why do we picture them grunting, stumbling, barely thinking?
Perhaps it comforts us to believe we are the pinnacle, that we earn this world because we were smarter, more capable, more destined.
But when we find traces of organized camps, shared meals, care for the injured, and children buried with artifacts,
doesn't that narrative begin to fracture? Maybe what frightens us isn't how different Neanderthals were, but how similar. We don't know their names, we don't know their stories, but we know they knew fire. They touched it,
gathered around it. Maybe they told stories to each other by its glow, stories we'll never recover, but somehow still long to remember.
And maybe that's what haunts us most. The silence that came after the last Neanderthal fire was extinguished.
And how little we noticed its absence, because somewhere, between the soot and stone, there's a question we've only just begun to ask. What if their fire never really went out?
It always begins with fire.
Even before language, before names,
before gods.
There was fire. For Neanderthals, and perhaps for all who came before and after, fire was not just warmth, not just light.
It was a boundary, a signal, a companion.
It marked the line between life and death,
between predator and protector, between silence and story. And yet, we often forget it was not always theirs. At some point in deep time, someone had to take it, to reach into flame and claim it for the tribe.
To learn how to tend it, tame it, pass it from cave to cave like a holy thread connecting generations. Neanderthals did this, and what they did next around the fire reveals the heart of who they were. In the stillness of ancient caves, the blackened bones tell their tales.
Ashes and charred embers frozen in place for 40,000 years.
Traces of meals, of warmth, of comfort,
of something more. The placement of fire pits wasn't random. They were always central, always surrounded.
Like a hearth, not just a tool. This is not survival. This is culture. We imagine them strong, fur-wrapped bodies seated in a circle.
The fire crackling and hissing in the center. Flames dancing across stone walls painted with flickers of light and shadow. Hands warming over the embers. Children leaning against mothers. An elder leaning forward to tell a story.
In whatever shape stories took back then, maybe it wasn't words. Maybe it was rhythm, gesture, song, the mimicry of animals, the reenactment of hunts, the mythic memory of the sky. But it was storytelling all the same. Recent discoveries at sites like La Pharisee and El Cid and hint at patterns of fire use that resemble ceremony. In one, a ring of stones carefully placed surrounded a pit of ancient charcoal. In another, multiple fires spaced at regular intervals in a cavern, each containing fragments of bone, burnt but arranged, not dumped, not careless. What do we call that? If not ritual. And if they had ritual, did they have grief? Did they mourn? Because we have found Neanderthal skeletons buried with care, bodies tucked gently, not tossed. Graves sometimes shallow, but purposeful, and often near fire. Imagine the flame flickering as they lowered one of their own into the earth. Maybe a mother, maybe a child.
Did they chant? Did they cry? Or was it the silence that meant the most?
The
fire was their memory. Each flame carried the scent of past hunts, past winters, past loves. Smoke curled upward into the dark, etching invisible histories on the cave ceiling. It was the first screen. The first projector, shadow play against stone, became the beginning of theatre.
Sparks rising in the night became the backdrop of myth. They may not have had gods,
But they had awe, and awe is the first ancestor of belief. When scientists recreated Neanderthal environments in labs, they discovered something haunting: the amount of smoke needed to blacken the ceilings in those caves.
the consistency of the hearths, the way the soot layered in annual rings, like tree growth. It meant these fires weren't occasional. They were constant, which means these people didn't just pass through. They lived there. They returned. They stayed. The caves weren't shelters from storms. They were homes, and the fire, that glowing core, was the heart of it all. What did they see when they stared into those flames? Perhaps memories.
Or visions, or just warmth, pure and simple, but that warmth binds across time. Because when we sit by our modern fires, or stare into our
Glowing screens late at night, we are not far removed. We're still creatures of flame.
still shaped by its rhythms, still drawn to its glow, it's no coincidence that we tell our children stories by lamplight, or that we gather around birthday candles, funeral pyres, sacred hearths. Somewhere in our marrow, in our mitochondria, Neanderthals still whisper stories by the fire. They may not have left us monuments, but they left us fire, and in that fire, a reminder that even before civilization,
There was connection, not through cities, not through empires,
but through warmth and story.
and flame. In the next chapter, we'll follow a colder trail. As Homo
Sapiens spread across the world, Neanderthals began to disappear. But was it extinction?
or something more subtle.
They were more than trees.
They were sentinels. Vast, ancient forests blanketed the earth during the age of the Neanderthals.
Towering canopies of oaks and birches rose into the sky, filtering sunlight into pools of quiet gold.
Beneath the leaves, there were shadows and stories.
These were not just places to hide, to hunt, or to shelter from the cold.
These forests were living witnesses to an epoch we barely remember, watching as two branches of humanity moved silently among their
Trunks. What did the trees see when Neanderthals stepped softly through their underbrush?
what whispers might echo between the bark and breeze if we knew how to listen.
To imagine a world where Neanderthals never vanished is to imagine a different kind of intimacy with nature. A world where the forest remained not just a resource to
Be harvested, but a companion in our shared evolution.
In many ways, Neanderthals lived closer to the green silence than we ever did.
They didn't just pass through the forest, they belonged to it. They read the signs in the moss, heard the warnings in the bird calls, and found in the tangle of roots and branches a language of survival. We sometimes paint them as brutish, simple, short, and shrouded in winter. But what if their simplicity was wisdom?
They didn't flatten forests. They flowed through them.
Where we leave roads and ruin, they left little more than footprints, fire pits, and the occasional carefully knapped flint blade. If they had survived, would our cities have grown so loud?
Would we have paved over so many green places?
Or would we have learned from our Neanderthal cousins a quieter way to live? One where the forest was not something to conquer, but something to be in conversation with. Scientists tell us they used birch tar, made by slow-burning tree bark, in sealed containers.
It was glue primitive. Yes, but made with patience and understanding.
They didn't stumble upon it.
They studied the trees.
They listened. They experimented with fire and time and temperature. And through this slow ritual, they unlocked
A form of technology hidden in bark.
what else might they have uncovered? Given more time, what else did the forest give them in that long partnership?
Now imagine them still walking those wooded paths. Neanderthal children crouching beside freshwater springs, carving toys from soft wood.
Helderkin teaching them to recognize which mushrooms were friends and which were fatal. Whole family groups moving from glade to glade, not in haste, but in rhythm with the seasons. The animals, the life that thrummed just beneath the soil. If
They had not disappeared. Would we have preserved more of this ancient intimacy?
would our relationship with the wild be less adversarial, more collaborative?
Perhaps in a shared world, their reverence would have softened our conquest. But perhaps more haunting than what we could have learned from them is what the forests may still remember, buried beneath the fallen leaves. There may still be echoes.
Charred from a fire that warmed Neanderthal hands, worn stones shaped by their tools.
Bits of bone that once held thought, pain, memory.
The forest floor forgets nothing quickly. It holds time in its roots. And if you walk quiet enough,
If you let the wind hush the static in your mind, you might hear it.
the stillness that isn't empty, the branches swaying not with weather, but with the memory of movement, the sense that someone was here, someone who knew these woods not as a resource, but as a home. In that sense, maybe the Neanderthals never
truly left. Maybe in every forest path that feels oddly familiar, in every bird call that stops us mid-step, in every flicker of DJVU while standing in a sun-dappled clearing, we are hearing them.
Not their voices, but the world they
Help shape.
A quieter world, a slower one, and one that still waits. Let's keep walking. Because what lies deeper in these woods might be more than memory. It might be the future we once ignored. What were the first things we tried to say? And why did we choose stone to say them?
Before words flow from lips, our ancestors carved into cave walls not for beauty, but perhaps to hold onto something that might slip away. Hands outlined in ochre, animals that danced in firelight, spirals with meanings we've long forgotten.
These early messages whisper across millennia, yet we still don't know if they were prayers, memories, or warnings. Somewhere in a hollow of the earth, beneath a ceiling darkened by soot and silence, a human hand pressed pigment to stone. And in that moment, something eternal happened. That act, simple and quiet, became a tether across time. The caves of Lascaux and Chauvet are not merely art galleries. They are memory chambers.
These paintings are not primitive.
They are deliberate, poetic, almost mathematical. The strokes follow rhythms of breath, of heartbeat, of something older than words. Long before language took form in grammar and sentence, it lived as gesture and symbol.
These were not just expressions of identity, they were tools of transmission. One generation could leave a message to the next without meeting. In a world where nothing lasted, the idea that a mark could remain survive storms, decay, death,
Must have felt like magic, and perhaps that's what it was. A kind of proto-magic.
a belief that stone could remember, that a wall could bear witness.
That echoes could take shape. Some archaeologists believe that certain caves were chosen, not for shelter, but for their acoustic properties.
Sound moves strangely in these places.
Whispers return as thunder. Footsteps become ceremonies. Perhaps early humans found these caves sacred not because of what they saw, but because of what they heard. Because the walls spoke back, or at least
Didn't let their voices disappear. When we consider why Homo sapiens endured while others did not, we often look to tools, to fire, to cooperation.
But what if the difference was memory? Not the kind locked in a brain, but the kind that survives outside of it. In pigments, grooves, scratches, fossils of thought, because even now, thousands of years later, we feel something when we look
At those handprints,
not logic,
not knowledge.
but connection, like someone reached across time and said, I was here.
I try to make sense of this too. It raises the question, were these drawings about hunting or about being? Were they meant to instruct or to endure?
Perhaps the answer is both.
Because survival is not just about food and fire, it's about meaning.
And meaning is delicate. Without something to carry it, it vanishes, just like a breath in winter.
So, these marks may have been more than art.
They were insurance, against forgetting, against erasure, against the slow grind of time that turns stories to silence. And maybe, if Neanderthals had done this more or differently, their minds would not feel so lost to us. Maybe they did leave messages, but in a language we can no longer hear.
Or maybe they never developed this strange instinct to reach beyond their own lives, because to mark a wall is to imagine the future.
It is to believe there will be eyes to see it, minds to interpret it, hearts to feel it, and that belief in the unknown reader might be what truly made us human. So we wonder, still,
What were they trying to say in the flickering dark?
with stone in one hand and silence in the other. And what, if anything, have we truly understood? What is it that burns quietly inside a mind shaped by the cold and the dark? Somewhere in the silence of ancient Europe, while ice sheets groaned across the land and mammoths wandered beneath slate-grey skies, a fire flickered in the chest of
A being not unlike ourselves.
Neanderthals. Squat, strong, and steady, weren't just creatures of stone and hunt. There was something stirring deeper, something harder to name. Beneath thick brows and calloused hands lived a strange, wordless spark, the kind of flame you can't see, only feel, not the fire of flint and kindling, but the fire of memory, of planning, of dreaming. In the charcoal rings of old hearths, archaeologists find not just heat, but habit. Some sites show the same fire pits used over and over again for generations.
That suggests return a rhythm to life.
The Neanderthals weren't just passing through, they were staying, returning, sitting.
Around these fires, they may have
Cooked, shared food, perhaps even grieved or celebrated. Did they look into the flames and see visions?
We'll never know the shape of their inner worlds, not fully.
But even now, the clues whisper.
burnt bones arranged purposefully, ochre stains on cave walls, a deer skull carefully placed near a hearth as if to watch over them. Could it be ritual? Could it be reverence? We want so badly to know, because if Neanderthals kindled meaning
in the fire, then perhaps the gap between us isn't as wide as we once believed. Today, we talk about kindling ideas or sparking imagination.
those metaphors go back farther than we think. Fire wasn't just survival.
It was transformation. The same flame that softened meat also hardened thought.
With warmth came rest.
With rest came reflection. In the pause between danger and hunger, something more could emerge: storytelling, speculation, even silence shared in understanding. But here's the question that pulls at us. What did they feel?
We picture them as hardened, brutal, emotionless. But that says more about us than about them.
In the ash and soot of prehistoric shelters, researchers now find signs of care.
Healed bones, ones that would have required weeks of nurturing.
Elders who lived past usefulness, only possible if they were valued beyond productivity. A blind man, toothless, yet kept alive.
That's not accident. That's empathy. Somewhere in the quiet warmth of a fire, surrounded by kin, maybe they told
stories, not with words like ours, but with gestures, glances, repetitions. A mother reenacting a hunt, a child mimicking the movement, a brother remembering the path of the stars.
These weren't savages.
These were as wearing an older skin. And then, the fire dims when we forgot them. It wasn't because they failed to burn. It was because we rewrote the story. We cast ourselves as the flame bearers, and them as the shadows. But the truth is softer, murkier, and more painful, because what if the fire within us came from them? Maybe it was passed like a torch, not extinguished, but inherited. Not conquest, but convergence.
What if that forgotten fire is still burning?
In our blood, in our breath, in the deep instincts we can't explain. The moment you sit quietly by a campfire and lose yourself in thought, something ancient stirs.
When you find comfort in the glow of warmth, when the light dances in your eyes, maybe that's the Neanderthal in you, remembering. Fire didn't just change the world around them. It changed the world within, and as the embers crackle, you
start to wonder how much of that quiet fire still lives in us. Not a word, not a symbol, just a smear,
a handprint,
a streak, a stain.
Not on parchment, not on papyrus, but on the walls of a cave, hidden in darkness for tens of thousands
of years. The pigment is red, sometimes brownish, sometimes bright.
Ochre, earth ground down and mixed with fat or spit, then applied to stone, not by accident, that by intention. And that changes everything, because to make a mark is to make a statement.
Even if the language is long lost.
When a Neanderthal pressed a hand against a wall and blew ochre around it, they weren't merely decorating. They were declaring, I was here, not just alive, not just surviving present. The red stain on stone is one of the oldest known gestures of selfhood.
Found deep in caves in Spain and France, some of these handprints are over 60,000 years old.
Older than our species in that part of the world, which means they weren't made by us. They were made by them, and that complicates things, because we believed we were the only ones who marked time,
who made memory, who saw beauty in a smear of color.
But those prints, they linger, they refuse to fade.
And they ask a question so haunting, we often flinch from it. What did Neanderthals see when they looked at the world?
Did they recognize beauty?
Did they create it?
We've found discs of red pigment in Neanderthal burial sites, collected and stored as if precious. We've uncovered shells stained with ochre, possibly worn as ornaments.
Bones edged with lines, regular and rhythmic, as if someone were counting
or composing.
This is not random. This is choice. It suggests they weren't just reacting to the world. They were reshaping it not with tools alone, but with meaning. Red ochre wasn't practical.
You can't eat it.
It doesn't kill prey.
It doesn't protect from the cold.
And yet, they carried it,
stored it,
scattered it over bones, applied it to walls, again and again, as if it meant something more. Red, the color of blood, the color of life, the color of fire. Maybe they saw it the way we do. Maybe they didn't. But the repetition speaks louder than language.
Something about it mattered. Some researchers think the pigment had symbolic value linked to death, or birth, or power.
Others suggest it was used in rituals, or to signal
identity, or simply to connect to something beyond words. But no matter the theory, one thing is certain. It was deliberate, and deliberate action leaves a shadow. What we're staring at in those cave walls isn't just art.
It's the echo of a mind reaching outward. It's an attempt, maybe clumsy,
may be profound to leave something behind.
Not just bones, not just tools, but presence, expression, a mark that outlives the body, a whisper,
Carried forward by stone. You can almost picture it. A group gathered.
In the flickering firelight, one figure mixing ochre with fat, dipping a finger into the thick red paste and moving toward the wall. Others watching, silent,
Curious, reverent, even. Then the hand lifted,
pressed,
held.
a breath,
A blow of pigment.
a pause, and then the hand removed, leaving its ghost behind. What does that moment mean? Maybe it was nothing, a game,
A gesture.
a whim, or maybe it was everything, the beginning of art,
Of identity.
of legacy. We like to believe that our need to create, to express, to leave something behind is uniquely human. But if Neanderthals were doing it too,
Then we aren't.
alone in that origin,
They too looked at the void and wanted to fill it.
with color, with shape, with themselves. The red stain on stone is not just pigment. It is presence, and even now, across tens of thousands of years, in the cool silence of a cave that hasn't seen light since the last ice age, their mark remains,
Unfaded.
unexplained,
Undeniable. A signature not of a name.
but of being.
We often imagine evolution in terms of the body's stronger muscles, bigger brains, sharper senses.
But what if one of its most profound battlegrounds wasn't the bone or the sinew, but the soul?
Emotions are ancient. Fear predates fire.
Joy predates language,
Love.
may have existed before we even had the words to understand what it was. These currents run deeper than thought. They are not just responses, they are survival. And in the world where Neanderthals never disappeared, emotion would have followed. A different path, not instead of ours, but alongside it. Two species evolving, not only physically, but emotionally, each carrying distinct styles of feeling, of bonding, of grieving, of belonging. We've found traces of Neanderthal tenderness in their burial sites, bodies carefully placed, sometimes with tools or flowers, as though saying, "You mattered, you were known, you will not be forgotten." They mourned, and mourning is not instinct, it is memory wrapped in meaning. What does it mean that they did this? It means that emotion wasn't exclusive to Homo sapiens. It never was.
And in a shared world, the emotional landscape of Earth would be richer, more varied, more layered than we could ever imagine. Neanderthals likely formed tight-knit groups.
The archaeological record suggests intimacy, not just proximity, but deep social cohesion.
They relied on one another not only to hunt or survive, but to exist.
Their survival was relational, emotional. In our timeline, Homo sapiens developed more abstract language, more symbolic culture. We told stories.
We painted gods on cave walls.
We imagined the future and the past.
But storytelling is not the only way to feel.
It is just one language of the heart. The Neanderthals may have expressed themselves differently, not with as many words, perhaps, but with touch, with presence, with time. While we looked to the stars and dreamed of destiny, maybe they looked into one another and understood home if they were here still.
Perhaps we would have been forced to redefine what emotional intelligence looks like. In our modern world, we prize speed of speech, of comprehension, of success.
But emotion doesn't always live at that pace.
Some feelings must steep like tea.
They require stillness.
And perhaps the Neanderthals were masters of that stillness, of listening without interrupting, of grieving without solving, of loving without owning. Imagine a child growing up in a joint community, half Homo sapiens, half Neanderthal,
learning two emotional languages, one of words, one of silences,
one that celebrates ambition, one that honors connection,
one that reaches outward, and one that holds inward. What kind of adults would we become if we were taught both? And what of conflict?
Emotion is not always soft.
Rage, jealousy, fear, they are as real as love. But here too, a dual humanity might have helped us evolve.
We might have had more mirrors, not just more perspectives, but more ways to reflect on our own reactions.
When your neighbor feels differently, not just because of culture, but because of a different evolutionary path, you are forced to ask, what is mine and what is ours? Over time, maybe this would have made us more compassionate. We often fear what is different, but difference is not danger.
In fact, sometimes it is the only way we grow. In a shared world, mental health may not have
carried the same stigma.
Emotional variation might have been normalized, not pathologized.
Two intelligent species experiencing the world in distinct emotional registers would create a spectrum, not a single right way to feel, but a chorus. Think of art in this world.
Music composed to stir both human and Neanderthal hearts. Theatre performed in two languages of expression, speech and gesture, metaphor and memory.
Songs written for voices shaped differently. Paintings that hold both abstraction and earthy symbol. This isn't fusion.
It's coexistence.
It's evolution through feeling. Even religion might look different.
Our gods tend to resemble us.
Our mythologies echo our fears, our dreams, our triumphs.
But in a world of dual emotion, the divine might not be cast in just our image. It might be broader, wilder, harder to define. That the stories passed down would include their grief, their wonder, their inner world.
And in listening, we would become something new, not just wiser, but more whole. Because the truth is, emotion doesn't evolve in isolation. It evolves through relationship, through friction, through difference.
Through love that crosses borders.
We thought we're uncro's sable dot in a world where Neanderthals never vanished. We would not only have had more time to learn about them.
We would have had more time to learn about ourselves. We might have realized sooner that emotion is not weakness.
It's not background noise.
It's not something to conquer. It's the core of what makes us alive. What if the ice didn't just preserve,
but whispered? High in the Alps, deep in frozen Siberia, and across the permafrost of forgotten places, the earth slowly exhales remnants of an age-long past. Bones, fibers, teeth.
Lives paused, and in their stillness, stories begin to stir. When the first Neanderthal remains were uncovered in a limestone cave in the Neander Valley in Germany, the world didn't know what to think.
The bones looked human, but not quite. The skull was thicker, the brow heavier, the limbs powerful, and yet the impression wasn't brutish, it was ancient, purposeful, like something left behind not by accident, but by deep time itself. But what of the bones still locked in silence?
Across ice shelves and alpine crevices, the cold acts as a time machine.
It seals, it guards. The glaciers are not just rivers of ice, they're keepers.
Within their shifting layers lie bones too fragile to survive the warmth of time.
Bones
of Neanderthals, Denisovans, perhaps even of people we've never named. Somewhere beneath a melting glacier in Central Asia, a perfectly intact Neanderthal child might still lie curled beside a now fossilized flint blade.
Not seen for 50,000 years, not touched since before words like civilization or history were even dreams. We've found teeth so old, they no longer hold DNA.
We've found tools beside them, as if someone long gone had just laid them down.
And when the ice retreats, when the planet warms, just another femur, a fragment, a fossilized sliver of a story comes forth. It doesn't speak.
But it implies it implies a life lived in rhythm with the cold.
A mother who wrapped her child in furs, tucking them near a fire, made from mammoth dung and dry grass.
A hunter who tracked reindeer across icy plains, reading snow the way we read screens.
A burial, perhaps, where ochre was poured, hands were folded, and goodbyes were said. The permafrost doesn't give generously, but it gives precisely. A tooth in Siberia led to the discovery of the Denisovans, a close cousin to Neanderthals. One single molar, preserved by frost, opened an entirely new branch in the human family tree. The implications shook anthropology.
All because the cold had kept time for us, quietly, patiently. But with climate change, the ice releases more than we can interpret, and it does so faster than we can study. Bones surface
and disintegrate. Bacteria awaken, and the silence that
once protected becomes a race against loss.
These remains, these fragile echoes of who we were, are vanishing even as they emerge still. The ones we've recovered tell of strength, yes, but also of community. Injury patterns in Neanderthal.
Skeletons show healing.
A shattered limb, a crushed foot. That mended. They were cared for. They were not abandoned. Even in the chill of survival, empathy endured. A broken rib that healed is a fossil of compassion. Their bones also tell of hardship, malnutrition, infection, wounds from animals,
or other humans.
But again and again, they live. They endured. In caves, under snow, in forests now gone, they adapted, adjusted, persevered.
Their bones bear the record not just of death,
but of life. And then, one day, they stopped. Not all at once, not in a single place, but slowly, their bones vanish from the record. The last of the Neanderthals disappears from the archaeological eye like a breath in winter air. No grand battle, no final scene, just silence. But the glaciers still remember, and
as they thaw, they whisper,
sometimes in jawbones, sometimes in charcoal, Sometimes in the faint trace of a child's footprint left in volcanic ash, these fragments are not relics. They're pages.
Pages of a book we still don't know how to read.
Every fossil is a word in a language of endurance. Every excavation
Is a translation effort across eons. The question now is, will we listen before the pages melt?
What if silence itself could record history? Beneath the hills of southern France and deep into the limestone of Spain, the darkness has been patient. For tens of thousands of years, the caves waited quiet, undisturbed, their walls gently sweating.
With the moisture of time.
And when we finally entered, we didn't just find old drawings.
We found echoes of a mind not so different from our own. The cave at Chauvet was not discovered, it was revealed. In 1994. 3 explorers allowed themselves through a narrow crevice and stepped into a chamber sealed off from the world for more than 30,000 years. Their torches flickered against the walls,
And the eyes of painted lions stared back.
rhinos, bears, mammoths,
Horses mid-gallop. The charcoal strokes were not crude.
they were intentional.
Expressive, layered with perspective, depth, even, motion, and in that moment, it became clear. We weren't the first to imagine, long before pyramids, before writing, before history. Someone stepped into the cave with firelight and pigment and created art. Not symbols, not practical records. Art, the impulse to represent, to express, to leave something behind that said, I was here. It wasn't just Chauvet.
Across Europe, in Lascaux and Altamira and dozens of lesser-known sites, the caves speak the same language.
Fingers dragged through ochre,
Hands pressed to stone, surrounded by red pigment negative prints of lives once lived.
Some are small, like a child's. Some large, adorned with jewelry or colored dots. We see repeated themes: animals hunted, animals revered. The bison bulging with power, the deer elongated into elegance, the wild horse caught mid-stride, its mane flaring in imagined wind. They didn't draw humans often.
But when they did, the forms were symbolic, half animal, half person. A shaman, perhaps,
Or a dream.
or something we still don't understand. In these caves, the boundaries blur between survival and imagination, between necessity and meaning, between the physical world and the inner one. Because what drives a person in a world of scarcity and danger to go deep into the earth just to paint? Why would someone crawl through tight tunnels, carry animal fat for their labs, mix pigments
From crushed rocks, and carefully lay images in the flickering dark. Maybe to tell a story. Maybe to connect with something greater.
or maybe,
To touch time. Some of the paintings overlap, not by accident.
but layered, like additions to a shared mural.
One generation adds a horse, another a bear, a third a handprint. Across thousands of years, this wasn't graffiti. It was memory built layer by layer, like sediment. And when stalactites began to grow over the paintings, the art didn't resist.
It became part of the cave itself, blended.
Preserved, waiting. Other caves hold music. In the Divi Bay cave of Slovenia, a bear femur was found, with precisely spaced holes drilled along its length. Some dismissed it. Others called it the oldest flute ever discovered, perhaps played by Neanderthals. If true, it means that music, too, predates what we call civilization. It suggests that long before cities or kingdoms or alphabets, humans were already searching for beauty, and still more caves hold footprints. In the Cave of the Hands in Argentina, a trail of human tracks moves past a gallery of painted palms.
Adult feet, children's feet,
A dog-like creature alongside them. Maybe a family.
maybe a ritual.
Maybe just a walk preserved in hardened mud. We don't know their names.
We don't know their language, but we know they were there.
And in the silence of the caves, we can almost hear them breathe. The caves weren't shelters. Most show no signs of everyday life, no hearts, no tools, no bones.
They weren't for living. They were for something else, maybe ceremony.
Maybe storytelling, maybe dreaming. Some believe the flickering torchlight brought the animals to life. The movement
Of flame across the rock making painted horses seemed to gallop, lions to stalk. It wasn't passive viewing, it was immersive.
experiential.
The first theta.
The first dreamscape. What's most remarkable is how little these images have faded. Through ice ages and floods, through quakes and time, the caves held firm. Because
They were protected not just by stone, but by intention.
sealed chambers,
Hidden entrances. Some artists even used the natural curves of the cave to shape their work, turning bulges in the rock into the shoulders of bulls, or hollows into the
mouths of roaring beasts. The cave was not a canvas. It was a collaborator, We often think of the ancient as primitive, but what if we're the ones who have forgotten how to see?
Because these images are not just the beginnings of art.
They are the continuation of something deeper than need to. Remember,
To imagine,
to leave behind a flicker of soul. The caves waited, not because they had to, but because they were made to. And now, as we descend with cameras and carbon dating, the question is not just what we'll find, but what we're.
still not seeing, we gather around the ancient firelight, not just to keep warm, but to remember,
To reflect.
and to dream.
For millennia, humans have circled flames and told stories, myths, warnings, visions, truths softened by metaphor. And yet, when we imagine the Neanderthals seated beside us, something shifts.
We're no longer the sole narrators of the human saga,
Would their myths have spoken of the stars? Of death?
of silence. Would they have had legends passed from grandmother to grandchild, murmured in smoky dusk? Fire was never just about heat,
It was about communion, the flickering arena.
where memory could be shared and shape identity. Archaeological clues, charred bones, burnt plants, structured hearths tell us Neanderthals were no strangers to this ritual. They tended fires through winter nights, just as we did.
They may have cooked, cured, preserved.
But beyond utility, did they also sit in reverent quiet, watching sparks ascend like thoughts?
Imagine sitting beside a Neanderthal by the fire.
There is no language you both understand, yet something unspoken is exchanged in the lower glance, a nod, the universal stillness of those who listen.
How much of communication is truly verbal?
If our species had diverged but remained side by side, would we have developed a shared mythology?
Would our philosophies have evolved in parallel, diverging only in shape, but not in purpose?
There's speculation that Neanderthals buried their dead with grave goods, placed flowers in tombs, arranged bones in deliberate patterns. Were these gestures of grief, or of something deeper, a reverence for memory, for unseen worlds, for continuity beyond the visible?
Sitting by the fire, they may have spoken of ancestors, of animals encountered in dreams, of landscapes that once were and might be again. The fire was not merely survival. It was mirror and window, altar and companion.
In its flicker, we may
Have recognized ourselves, and others not as enemies, not even as rivals, but as CEO dreamers in the same long night of time. If Neanderthals had never vanished, perhaps the myths we tell now would carry different shapes more rooted in land, in muscle, in stillness. Maybe we would have remembered how to listen longer before speaking. Today, as we sit around our own, modern fires, glowing screens, city lights, artificial warmth, perhaps what we miss isn't just the natural world we've distanced ourselves from, but the quiet presence of another humankind.
a kind who may have shown us how to be slower, more deliberate, more attuned to the rhythm of the earth and the language of silence. The question remains, what were their stories?
And the deeper question lingers, are any of their stories still alive in us?
What happens in the spaces between grand chapters of time, the quiet stretches where nothing seems to move, where species neither flourish nor fall, where oceans rise but slowly, and the air holds its breath?
These are the forgotten pauses, the liminal zones in Earth's memory where history doesn't roar but whispers.
They don't make it into textbooks, and yet they hold the connective tissue of deep-time glacial patience, tectonic stillness,
And the slow spiraling of carbon through soil and sky. We often imagine evolution as a race, a constant struggle for survival, but more often it was a meditation. Millions of years where the world simply waited.
Not all of Earth's changes arrived with fire and flood, some arrived in the hush of continuity, while mass extinctions drew lines in geological stone. These epochs in between softened the edges, quietly shaping everything that would come next. In these silences, climate shifted grain by grain,
Rain carved the same valleys for eons, winds, wore mountains to their knees.
and under the crust, deep below our memory, continents slowly prepared their next tectonic act. We might call them gaps, but they are more like breaths along an hail of possibility, before a world reshaped itself.
Again, fossils from these times are rare, not because life was absent, but because it wasn't dramatic enough to preserve. The creatures of these interludes were quiet survivors, filter feeders in murky seas, scavengers in sparse forests, microbes looping carbon and nitrogen in the soil.
These were not ages of giants, but of endurance.
And yet, without them, no, giants would follow. For us, the lesson is humbling.
When we speak of our own history, our rise from Australopithecines to astronauts, we often skip the slow parts. But in truth, we are built from them. Our DNA is a library of quiet adaptations.
Not every step was fire and stone.
Some was simply waiting, adapting, listening, and in these silences, there's something else, a strange stillness that feels almost sacred.
Perhaps that's why the fossil record sometimes feels like a song with missing notes.
It's not incomplete, it's
Just breathing. Let's follow that breath forward now.
because even the quietest moment eventually stirs beneath our modern cities. Beneath the concrete and steel and glowing screens lie ancient soils.
Some have never been touched by machines.
Some still cradle the soft impressions of what came. Before pollen grains from vanished forests, microscopic shells from inland seas, and strange streaks of magnetic memory held in clay, the earth records even its quietest moments, not in ink or sound, but in patterns and pressures and mineral alignments. Clay, often overlooked, is one of the most sensitive record keepers of our planet's past.
Its fine-grained structure allows
It to hold onto whispers tiny signals from the time it was laid down.
When rain first fell on bare volcanic rock and turned it to mud, the earliest sediments began to form a portrait of the earth that no living witness could paint.
These layers, soft and impressionable, captured traces of an atmosphere still figuring itself out, of microbes exchanging elements, of continents slowly moving like sleepwalkers across the face of the world. Taught in some places, these ancient clays remain undisturbed for billions of years, and when scientists slice through them today, they find more than dirt.
They find echoes. There are sections of Earth's history where nothing spectacular happened, no mass extinction, no explosive radiation of life. And yet, when the clay is studied closely, a quiet evolution is revealed, tiny changes in isotopes, suggesting global temperature shifts that happen over hundreds of thousands of years.
Faint traces of iron particles, revealing the flickering pulse of Earth's magnetic field.
Subtle differences in mineral color, hinting at long-forgotten rains or ancient droughts. These are the stories told in silence, through texture and trace. They tell us that evolution doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in the dark.
Through layers of stillness, through the slow settling of particles over 1,000 lifetimes. And yet, even within this hush, transformation was taking place.
Clay cradled not just physical impressions, but chemical ones, preserving ancient DNA, bits of RNA, remnants of proteins from creatures long gone.
These were not fossils in the traditional sense, but molecular shadows, some so delicate they
disappear the moment they're exposed.
others stubborn, surviving under pressure, like secrets the earth has chosen to keep until just the right hands come along to read them. Think of a single raindrop landing in mud 100 million years
ago. That drop dries, but its mark lingers, covered by another and another, each one forming part of a slow-motion film played over epochs.
Somewhere in that sediment lies a turning point. Perhaps a small burrow made by a worm that dug in a new direction. Perhaps a shift in clay composition that shows where freshwater first touched salt.
These small shifts added up until one day, life followed them forward. Today, as we look back through time, it is this quiet material clay that lets us trace the thread. The echoes are faint, but clear enough. We can feel the weight of time pressing down through the layers. We can feel the moments between moments, the space where time itself held still, watching, waiting, and shaping the path that would eventually lead to us, long before cities, long before mammals,
Even before the age of dinosaurs, the Earth war.
a green skin, a strange and primitive forest that changed everything.
These were not the trees we know today.
There were no flowers, no fruit, no chirping birds in the branches. The air was heavier, wetter, rich with strange chemicals, and within it stood towering forms made not of wood, as we now understand it, but of dense, fibrous tissue, some hollow, some filled with water, some reaching for light in awkward, alien
ways. They were the first giants of land, the clubmosses, horsetails, and ferns that stretched higher than any creature had ever dared to climb.
These early forests, appearing roughly 385 million years ago during the Devonian period, were the first complex systems to truly master life on land.
And with their arrival came a transformation so profound it altered the very sky above them. These
ancient plants did something extraordinary. They pulled carbon dioxide from the air in unprecedented amounts, locking it away in their tissues and roots.
and when they died, much of their biomass didn't decay like modern plants do.
Instead, it piled up in thick, wet layers, buried by time,
Pressed into peat, and eventually transformed into coal, the fossil signature of the Carboniferous period. But
in those earliest days, As the forests grew and spread, a more immediate change took place.
Oxygen levels rose, slowly at first, then rapidly. The earth, once cloaked in thick gases, became a place where fire could burn,
Where animals could grow larger,
where metabolism could speed up, where breath could become deeper, longer, more efficient, and all because something rooted itself in
the soil and reached upward. These forests, though silent and strange, breathed life into the atmosphere.
They were ecosystems unlike anything today, wet, shadowed worlds filled with giant insects and strange amphibians, crawling and slithering beneath dripping leaves.
The air was heavy with moisture and the scent of decay, and the ground trembled, with the slow pulse of life newly adapted to land. And yet, these forests were not just biological revolutions, they were geological agents.
Their roots fractured rock, helping create the first real soils. Their fallen trunks dammed rivers and changed the flow of water across the land.
They triggered glaciations by cooling the climate through massive carbon absorption. They didn't
Just live in the world. They reshaped it. There's something deeply humbling about this time, about imagining a world dominated not by animals, but by plants. A world where the most powerful force was quiet growth.
where nothing moved fast, but everything moved forward, where life rose up inch by inch, year by year, pushing its way out of the swamps and into the sky today. The remnants of those forests lie deep underground, compacted into the coal seams we mine to light our homes.
Their energy, stored in the
Black rock fuels much of our modern world.
but with every lump of coal, we burn a piece of ancient sunlight.
We release the carbon once locked away by those breathing giants, and slowly we begin to reverse the work they once did, still in the
Oldest forests today in misty valleys and primeval swamps, you can catch a glimpse of that ancient world. The ferns still unfurl their spiral fronds like clockwork. The mosses still blanket stones with patient care, and the trees still breathe in carbon and exhale life. It is a reminder that we are not the first to change this planet.
And we may not be the last, but if we listen carefully, we can still hear the rustle of those first forests, echoing across time, reminding us of what green can do when given time, space, and silence.
What happens in the spaces between grand chapters of time, the quiet stretches where nothing seems to move, where species neither flourish nor fall, where oceans rise but slowly, and the air holds its breath?
These are the forgotten pauses, the liminal zones in Earth's memory where history doesn't roar but whispers.
They don't make it into textbooks, and yet they hold the connective tissue of deep-time glacial patience, tectonic stillness,
And the slow spiraling of carbon through soil and sky. We often imagine evolution as a race, a constant struggle for survival, but more often it was a meditation. Millions of years where the world simply waited.
Not all of Earth's changes arrived with fire and flood. Some arrived in the hush of continuity, while mass extinctions drew lines in geological stone. These epochs in between softened the edges, quietly shaping everything that would come next. In these silences, climate shifted grain by grain.
Rain carved the same valleys for eons, winds wore mountains to their knees.
And under the crust, deep below our memory, continents slowly prepared their next tectonic act. We might call them gaps, but they are more like breaths along an hail of possibility, before a world reshaped itself.
Again, fossils from these times are rare, not because life was absent, but because it wasn't dramatic enough to preserve. The creatures of these interludes were quiet survivors, filter feeders in murky seas, scavengers in sparse forests, microbes looping carbon and nitrogen in the soil.
These were not ages of giants, but of endurance.
And yet, without them, no, giants would follow. For us, the lesson is humbling.
When we speak of our own history, our rise from Australopithecines to astronauts, we often skip the slow parts. But in truth, we are built from them. Our DNA is a library of quiet adaptations.
Not every step was fire and stone.
Some was simply waiting, adapting, listening, and in these silences, there's something else, a strange stillness that feels almost sacred.
Perhaps that's why the fossil record sometimes feels like a song with missing notes.
It's not incomplete, it's
just breathing. Let's follow that breath forward now.
Because even the quietest moment eventually stirs beneath our modern cities. Beneath the concrete and steel and glowing screens lie ancient soils.
Some have never been touched by machines.
Some still cradle the soft impressions of what came. Before pollen grains from vanished forests, microscopic shells from inland seas, and strange streaks of magnetic memory held in clay. The earth records even its quietest moments, not in ink or sound, but in patterns and pressures and mineral alignments. Clay, often overlooked, is one of the most sensitive record keepers of our planet's past.
Its fine-grained structure allows
It to hold onto whisper's tiny signals from the time it was laid down.
when rain first fell on bare volcanic rock and turned it to mud, the earliest sediments began to form a portrait of the Earth that no living witness could paint.
These layers, soft and impressionable, captured traces of an atmosphere still figuring itself out, of microbes exchanging elements, of continents slowly moving like sleepwalkers across the face of the world taught in some places. These ancient clays remain undisturbed for billions of years, and when scientists slice through them today, they find more than dirt.
They find echoes. There are sections of Earth's history where nothing spectacular happened, no mass extinction, no explosive radiation of life. And yet, when the clay is studied closely, a quiet evolution is revealed, tiny changes in isotopes, suggesting global temperature shifts that happen over hundreds of thousands of years.
Faint traces of iron particles, revealing the flickering pulse of Earth's magnetic field.
Subtle differences in mineral color, hinting at long-forgotten rains or ancient droughts. These are the stories told in silence, through texture and trace. They tell us that evolution doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in the dark.
Through layers of stillness, through the slow settling of particles over 1,000 lifetimes. And yet, even within this hush, transformation was taking place.
Clay cradled not just physical impressions, but chemical ones, preserving ancient DNA, bits of RNA, remnants of proteins from creatures long gone.
These were not fossils in the traditional sense, but molecular shadows, some so delicate they
disappear the moment they're exposed.
others stubborn, surviving under pressure, like secrets the Earth has chosen to keep until just the right hands come along to read them. Think of a single raindrop landing in mud 100 million years
ago. That drop dries, but its mark lingers, covered by another and another, each one forming part of a slow-motion film played over epochs.
Somewhere in that sediment lies a turning point. Perhaps a small burrow made by a worm that dug in a new direction. Perhaps a shift in clay composition that shows where freshwater first touched salt.
These small shifts added up until one day, life followed them forward. Today, as we look back through time, it is this quiet material clay that lets us trace the thread. The echoes are faint, but clear enough. We can feel the weight of time pressing down through the layers. We can feel the moments between moments, the space where time itself held still, watching, waiting, and shaping the path that would eventually lead to us, long before cities, long before mammals,
Even before the age of dinosaurs, the Earth war.
a green skin, a strange and primitive forest that changed everything.
These were not the trees we know today.
There were no flowers, no fruit, no chirping birds in the branches. The air was heavier, wetter, rich with strange chemicals, and within it stood towering forms made not of wood, as we now understand it, but of dense, fibrous tissue, some hollow, some filled with water, some reaching for light in awkward, alien
ways. They were the first giants of land, the clubmosses, horsetails, and ferns that stretched higher than any creature had ever dared to climb.
These early forests, appearing roughly 385 million years ago during the Devonian period, were the first complex systems to truly master life on land.
And with their arrival came a transformation so profound it altered the very sky above them. These
ancient plants did something extraordinary. They pulled carbon dioxide from the air in unprecedented amounts, locking it away in their tissues and roots.
and when they died, much of their biomass didn't decay like modern plants do.
Instead, it piled up in thick, wet layers, buried by time,
Pressed into peat, and eventually transformed into coal, the fossil signature of the Carboniferous period. But
in those earliest days, as the forests grew and spread, a more immediate change took place.
oxygen levels rose, slowly at first, then rapidly. The Earth, once cloaked in thick gases, became a place where fire could burn,
Where animals could grow larger,
where metabolism could speed up, where breath could become deeper, longer, more efficient, and all because something rooted itself in
the soil and reached upward. These forests, though silent and strange, breathed life into the atmosphere.
They were ecosystems unlike anything today, wet, shadowed worlds filled with giant insects and strange amphibians, crawling and slithering beneath dripping leaves.
The air was heavy with moisture and the scent of decay, and the ground trembled with the slow pulse of life newly adapted to land. And yet, these forests were not just biological revolutions, they were geological agents.
Their roots fractured rock, helping create the first real soils. Their fallen trunks downed rivers and changed the flow of water across the land.
They triggered glaciations by cooling the climate through massive carbon absorption. They didn't
Just live in the world. They reshaped it. There's something deeply humbling about this time, about imagining a world dominated not by animals, but by plants. A world where the most powerful force was quiet growth.
where nothing moved fast, but everything moved forward, where life rose up inch by inch, year by year, pushing its way out of the swamps and into the sky today. The remnants of those forests lie deep underground, compacted into the coal seams we mine to light our homes.
Their energy, stored in the
Black rock fuels much of our modern world.
but with every lump of coal, we burn a piece of ancient sunlight.
We release the carbon once locked away by those breathing giants, and slowly we begin to reverse the work they once did, still in the
Oldest forests today in misty valleys and primeval swamps, you can catch a glimpse of that ancient world. The ferns still unfurl their spiral fronds like clockwork. The mosses still blanket stones with patient care, and the trees still breathe in carbon and exhale life. It is a reminder that we are not the first to change this planet.
And we may not be the last, but if we listen carefully, we can still hear the rustle of those first forests, echoing across time, reminding us of what green can do when given time, space, and silence.
Deep beneath the frozen stillness of Antarctica, where the cold locks even the wind into silence, something ancient lies hidden, something vast, something mountainous, something that once towered above the earth and now sleeps beneath a mile-thick crust of ice.
These are the Gamburtsev Mountains, a Forsyth mountain range, as tall and dramatic as the European Alps, yet completely invisible to the human eye.
Not because they are lost or forgotten, but because they are entombed in a blanket of frozen time, discovered not by sight, but by radar echoes and seismic tremors. The Gamburtsev Range is one of the greatest geological mysteries on the planet. How can such rugged peaks exist under ice so thick and old that it predates human history?
Why are they there at all, in the cold heart of the Antarctic continent, buried far from any tectonic collision? These ghost mountains raise more questions than answers. We think they formed around 1 billion years ago, during a time when continents matched together to form ancient supercontinents like Rodinia. Mountains rose, time wore them down. But something happened, something strange.
Unlike most ancient ranges that eroded into hills and plains, the Gamburtsevs were rejuvenated. Like a corpse rising from the grave, they lifted again, long after.
Their birth, reshaped by forces still not entirely understood, perhaps mantle plumes stirred from deep below.
Or perhaps ancient faults fractured open again.
The Earth is capable of secrets, and these peaks are one of its most private. Over time, snow began to fall, soft, relentless. For millions of years it didn't melt.
Instead, it compacted into ice,
sheet upon sheet, until eventually the mountains were no longer mountains, but hidden ghosts beneath a frozen ocean. What lies in those valleys? What rests in the hollows between their peaks? Lakes of liquid water, sealed away for millions of years. Ancient life, perhaps microbial and slow, surviving in the dark, pressurized pools beneath the glacier. We have drilled into some of these
subglacial lakes like Lake Vostok, and found life still stirring in the shadows.
But the Gamburtsevs remain untouched, sacred in their secrecy, if the ice melted, which it may. One day, under the weight of human-caused warming, those mountains would emerge like gods returning from slumber. A whole world, unseen since the time of the dinosaurs, would re-enter the daylight. But what else would wake with them?
Climate models suggest that the Antarctic ice sheet began forming precisely because the Gamburtsevs provided a central spine, a topographic anchor around which ice could accumulate. Without those mountains, Antarctica might never have become a white continent.
Their hidden presence changed the destiny of the southern pole.
They altered the wind,
the sea,
the temperature of the world, which means we owe much to something we have never seen. Or imagine walking those buried ridgelines,
stepping carefully on stone not touched by air for tens of millions of years, is to realize how vast and slow
Earth's story truly is. We live on the surface, but the true shape of the planet, the drama and violence and beauty often plays out in places where no foot has ever trodden. The Gamburtsev Mountains are not alone in their anonymity.
All around the globe lie invisible ranges, beneath oceans, under deserts, deep within tectonic plates.
But none are as dramatically forgotten as this, an entire mountain system sealed beneath ice so thick it seems like time itself has paused. And yet, under pressure, the land still shifts. Gravity pours, glaciers flow, and even buried mountains breathe if you watch them long enough.
The ice above them cracks, moves, groans.
It tells us the mountains are still there, pushing upward, ever so slowly, like dreams beneath a frozen
Mind, sometimes when scientists fly over these regions in radar-equipped planes, the signal reveals glimpses ghostly outlines of jagged peaks, valleys, and escarpments drawn not in light, but in data.
These digital mountain ranges remind us that Earth is not flat beneath the ice. It is wild, sculpted.
Dramatic.so the next time you look at a globe and see Antarctica as a smooth white sheet, imagine what hides beneath.
Imagine an entire alpine landscape locked away like a secret manuscript, sealed beneath 1,000,000 years of silence.
Imagine standing on a ridge where the sun hasn't shone in epochs, listening to the silence that can only come from deep time. They are not just mountains.
They are memories of a wilder Earth waiting to thaw, off the coast of Mexico.
Beneath the tear waters of the Yucatan Peninsula lies a crater so vast and silent it could be mistaken for a forgotten scar on the ocean floor.
But this is no ordinary depression in the Earth. It is the Chicxulub crater, the wound left behind by the impact that ended the age of dinosaurs and reset the biological story of our planet. Roughly 66 million years ago, an asteroid the size of a city descended through Earth's atmosphere with a speed that defies comprehension.
In the blink of an eye, it collided with our planet, releasing more energy than 1,000,000,000 nuclear bombs. The impact vaporized everything for hundreds of miles,
ignited global wildfires, and hurled dust so high into the atmosphere that the sky went dark.
Plants died,
Oceans boiled,
food chains collapsed,
and 75% of all species, including the mighty dinosaurs, vanished. The crater it left behind was over 100 miles wide. But time has a way of healing what looks broken.
Today, the Chicxulub crater is hidden beneath layers of rock, sediment, and seawater. Only with satellite imaging and deep penetrating radar can we begin to trace the faint circular lines of its rim. The fractured heart of the cataclysm. It's difficult to grasp just how sudden it all was. One moment, Earth was humming with life lush. Forests, enormous reptiles, thriving seas, and the next, it was plunged into fire, then ash, then ice. In a single day, the balance of life tilted, and yet, in this destruction, something curious happened. Mammals survived. Small, adaptable, burrowing creatures made it through the darkness, feeding on scraps and hiding from the cold. Over millions of years, these survivors gave rise to something new. To us daughters, oh, when you think of the Chicxulub crater, don't just imagine death.
Imagine the long, slow rebirth that followed. The asteroid did not just kill the old world, it cleared the canvas. Standing today on the coastline of the Yucatan, you would see no signs of cosmic violence.
Just quiet waves.
A warm breeze, perhaps a pelican gliding above the surface.
But, just beneath, in the stone and sediment, lies evidence of the day Earth screamed. Core samples drilled from the center of the crater show shocked quartz minerals so disturbed by pressure they bear microscopic scars. There's iridium, to a rare metal more common in asteroids than Earth's crust, spread in a thin layer around the globe. A cosmic fingerprint. This fingerprint can be found in rock layers everywhere.
From Montana to Italy, from Egypt to New Zealand.
A global line. Below it, dinosaurs.
Above it, none.
A single moment, frozen in geology. And what's more haunting is that we didn't even discover the crater until the late 20th century. For decades, we saw the extinction in the rocks but didn't know where it came from. It was only when oil
companies began mapping anomalies in the Yucatan subsurface that they stumbled upon the circular formation.
A fossil of violence, hiding in plain sight. The Chicxulub event reminds us how fragile Earth's equilibrium truly is.
How quickly it can
change. And how tiny we are in the cosmic scale of things.
A rock from space.
A moment of heat. And life is rewritten, but also resilience. Life came back, slowly, tenderly. Ferns grew where fire had raged.
Oceans repopulated. New species emerged, filling ecological niches left behind. And eventually, humans would look up at the stars, wondering if something out there might strike again, because impacts are not rare.
The solar system is a shooting gallery. Most objects miss us. Some don't. Jupiter, with its massive gravity, protects us more often than we know, pulling asteroids into itself or flinging them into safe orbits. But not always. One day, something else might come. Another rock, another reckoning. And if it does, the Chicxulub crater will no longer be history.
It will be warning.so as you drift tonight. Picture the quiet blue sea hiding a memory of fire.
The crater is still there, the stone remembers, and beneath the calm, the earth still bears its scars. What do we truly inherit from the past? Beyond bones and stones, beneath layers of volcanic ash and the soot of ancient forest fires, lies the residue of lives once lived, extinctions and survivors, choices and chance, all compressed into geological parchment.
Ash, once airborne and choking, becomes a soft whisper in the sediment, telling of a moment when the sky darkened and everything changed. We often imagine catastrophe as sudden, loud, immediate, overwhelming, but the earth has a slower way of
remembering the fine grey powders of ancient eruptions, from Toba to Tambora, carry in them the climate-altering secrets of those last decades, the failed harvests, the migrating species, the sudden calling of a world that once basked in light. And it wasn't just animals and plants that bore the brunt of the ashfall.
early human migrations, guided by hunger and instinct, were often redirected by these violent interruptions.
When skies turned dark and familiar landscapes vanished beneath pumice and ash, people moved toward rivers that still flowed, toward coastlines that promised fish, toward valleys shielded from the suffocating fallout. Every time the earth erupted, it forced humanity to think differently. In those moments of upheaval, where the sun refused to rise and crops withered in the shadow of a distant explosion, we adapted, we shared.
We imagined warmth, shelter, and survival.
The very fire that threatened us became the one we learned to control.
Some scientists believe major bottlenecks in our evolution, moments when our population dwindled to a fragile few, were triggered by volcanic winters.
These narrow passages of survival, carved through soot and scarcity, may have shaped the way our brains evolved, favoring cooperation, imagination, and resilience. Today, when we study those silent, glassy ash layers under microscopes, we see not only the remnants of a planet in pain, but the fingerprints of the species that refuse to vanish. The inheritance of ash is not destruction, but memory.
It's a reminder that we've lived through endings before and emerged altered. We walk, even now, upon a world dusted with the memory of fire. And in the quiet of those layers, in the stillness between cataclysms, the earth waits,
whispering of the next time the sky may go dark, and what we might become when it does, beneath the quiet dust of forgotten valleys, and in the hard-packed soil of ancient riverbeds. The bones wait, not just remnants of flesh and life once lived, but messages, stories sealed in calcium and silence, shaped by time and pressure and chance.
We may look at a fossil as something inert, something long gone,
but in truth, bones are not dead things.
They are voices. Each curve of a rib, each worn tooth, each healed fracture has something to tell.
Not just of what a creature was, but how
it lived, how it walked, how it ate, how it suffered, how it loved.
A broken thigh bone mended by time tells as someone once paused to help, to wait, to carry.
Empathy, it turns out, fossilizes too, when paleoanthropologists brush away the soil to reveal a jawbone or a cranium. They are not merely uncovering a specimen, they are meeting an ancestor.
And sometimes what the bones say is not what we expected. The flatness of a skull, the angle of a pelvis, the wear on molars, all subtle arguments against the tidy stories we thought we knew about ourselves. Some of the oldest bones whisper of a time when we walked upright, but still climbed trees, when our hands were strong for gripping but delicate enough to carve tools from stone.
Others hint at a broader diversity, many human cousins, now extinct, who lived alongside us, challenged us, bred with us. We are not the lone survivors of a linear path, we are mosaics, and in this mosaic, new bones are still being found.
In the depths of Siberian caves, in the sun-baked hills of Ethiopia, in the muddy banks of forgotten lakes, each discovery reshuffles the deck, pushes the dates back, redraws the branches on our evolutionary tree. Homo naldi,
Denisovans, Australopithecus,
Afarensis, names from the deep past that now live again, reshaping our image of ourselves. Even the smallest bones speak loudest. Tinier bones from Neanderthals reveal how they might have heard the world not so differently from us. The inner structures of a child's tooth tell of stress and starvation, of seasons of scarcity endured. Even the powdery residue of marrow tells us what they ate, how they lived, how they died. But perhaps most humbling is this: the further back we go, the more alike we seem.
Differences blur.
The line between them and us dissolves. The skull of a Homo erectus child, cradled gently in a gloved hand, could be mistaken for one of our own, until you look a little closer, and see the echoes of another path. What
The bones remind us is that we are not the pinnacle, we are one result of a long, branching experiment.
And that experiment continues, written in bone and breath, in birth and burial. The bones speak of survival, of death,
Of grace,
of chance, and always, always of change. What do we truly inherit from the past, beyond bones and stones?
beneath layers of volcanic ash and the soot of ancient forest fires lies the residue of lives once lived, extinctions and survivors, choices and chance, all compressed into geological parchment. Ash, once airborne and choking, becomes a soft whisper in the sediment, telling of a moment when the sky darkened and everything changed. We often imagine catastrophe as sudden, loud, immediate, overwhelming. But the earth has a slower way of
Remembering the fine grey powders of ancient eruptions, from Toba to Tambora, carry in them the climate-altering secrets of those lost decades, the failed harvests, the migrating species, the sudden calling of a world that once basked in light. And it wasn't just animals and plants that bore the brunt of the ashfall.
early human migrations, guided by hunger and instinct, were often redirected by these violent interruptions.
When skies turned dark and familiar landscapes vanished beneath pumice and ash, people moved toward rivers that still flowed, toward coastlines that promised fish, toward valleys shielded from the suffocating fallout. Every time the earth erupted, it forced humanity to think differently. In those moments of upheaval, where the sun refused to rise and crops withered in the shadow of a distant explosion, we adapted, we shared.
We imagined warmth, shelter, and survival.
The very fire that threatened us became the one we learned
To control, some scientists believe major bottlenecks in our evolution moments when our population dwindled to a fragile few were triggered by volcanic winters.
These narrow passages of survival, carved through soot and scarcity, may have shaped the way our brains evolved, favoring cooperation, imagination, and resilience. Today, when we study those silent, glassy ash layers under microscopes, we see not only the remnants of a planet in pain, but the fingerprints of the species that refuse to vanish. The inheritance of ash is not destruction, but memory.
It's a reminder that we've lived through endings before and emerged altered. We walk, even now, upon a world dusted with the memory of fire. And in the quiet of those layers, in the stillness between cataclysms, the earth waits,
whispering of the next time the sky may go dark, and what we might become when it does, beneath the quiet dust of forgotten valleys, and in the hard-packed soil of ancient riverbeds. The bones wait, not just remnants of flesh and life once lived, but messages, stories sealed in calcium and silence, shaped by time and pressure and chance.
We may look at a fossil as something inert, something long gone.
But in truth, bones are not dead things.
They are voices. Each curve of a rib, each worn tooth, each healed fracture has something to tell.
Not just of what a creature was, but how.
It lived, how it walked, how it ate, how it suffered, how it loved.
A broken thigh bone mended by time
tells as someone once paused to help, to wait, to carry. Empathy, it turns out, fossilizes too, when paleoanthropologists brush away the soil to reveal a jawbone or a cranium. They are not merely uncovering a specimen, they are meeting an ancestor.
And sometimes what the bones say is not what we expected. The flatness of a skull, the angle of a pelvis, the wear on molars, all subtle arguments against the tidy stories we thought we knew about ourselves. Some of the oldest bones whisper of a time when we walked upright, but still climbed trees, when our hands were strong for gripping but delicate enough to carve tools from stone.
Others hint at a broader diversity, many human cousins, now extinct, who lived alongside us, challenged us, bred with us. We are not the lone survivors of a linear path, we are mosaics, and in this mosaic, new bones are still being found.
In the depths of Siberian caves,
In the sun-baked hills of Ethiopia,
in the muddy banks of forgotten lakes, each discovery reshuffles the deck, pushes the dates back, redraws the branches on our evolutionary tree. Homo naldi, Denisovans,
Australopithecus afarensis,
names from the deep past that now live again, reshaping our image of ourselves. Even the smallest bones speak loudest. Tinier bones from Neanderthals reveal how they might have heard the world not so differently from us. The inner structures of a child's tooth tell of stress and starvation, of seasons of scarcity endured. Even the powdery residue of marrow tells us what they ate, how they lived, how they died. But perhaps most humbling is this: the further back we go, the more alike we seem.
differences blur.
The line between them and us dissolves. The skull of a Homo erectus child, cradled gently in a gloved hand, could be mistaken for one of our own, until you look a little closer and see the echoes of another path. What the bones remind us is that we are not the pinnacle, we are one result of a long, branching experiment. And that experiment continues, written in bone and breath, in birth and burial.
The bones speak of
Survival, of death, of grace, of chance, and always, always of change. Beneath the ancient glaciers and the eternal frost, the earth hides its deepest slumberers.
not bones this time,
Not ruins or forgotten tombs,
but something colder, faster, older giants of ice and time that have slept for millennia, stirring only slightly in the silence of ages. They are not mythical beings, not dragons nor titans.
but their power is no less immense.
Beneath Antarctica, under Greenland's crown of white, and buried deep within Siberia's permafrost, there are stories held in suspension.
Entire forests flash frozen in time, perfectly preserved.
Viruses that have not breathed in tens of thousands of years.
Ancient mammoths with food still in their mouths and hair still clinging to their skin when the cold came. It came like a
Blanket pulled over the world. Temperatures plummeted, ice advanced, and life retreated.
But some things did not die, they waited.
The cold did not destroy them. It merely paused them.
And now, as the world warms, the ice recedes, and the sleepers begin to wake across the Arctic. Scientists have found preserved steppe lions, wolves, and rhinos, curled like they had lain down only yesterday.
Their DNA intact. Their stories almost readable.
The ground is giving up its secrets, one melt at a time. But what rises with the thaw is not always welcome, for the ice is not merely a time capsule, it is also a vault. Locked within it are pathogens that haven't existed in the modern world.
Bacteria from another epoch. Viruses, older than human civilization.
Some are harmless curiosities,
But others, no one can say.
and still, the thaw continues. In some regions, the ground itself becomes a kind of ghost. The permafrost, once solid as concrete, collapses into bogs and craters. Buildings tilt, roads split, and from deep below, gases that have been trapped for millions of years begin to seep upward. Methane, carbon dioxide, ancient breath returning to the sky. Even the ice sheets themselves speak.
Layers of snow, packed over centuries, tell stories in their chemistry. Volcanic eruptions, nuclear tests, industrial soot. Trapped bubbles of air give us records of Earth's atmosphere from before we were even here. When scientists drill down
Into these icy cores, they are not just touching ancient snow, they are touching history. And what these records whisper is sobering.
the ice is not just melting, it is weeping. Its tears raise seas. They shift ocean currents. They alter winds.
And weather, disrupting patterns that life has counted on for thousands of years. Greenland sheds billions of tons of ice each year.
Antarctica cracks and calves, birthing icebergs the size of cities. Yet in all this, there is also to hold in your hand a piece of ice that fell as snow 100,000 years ago is to connect with a world utterly unlike ours.
A world of mastodons and saber-toothed cats.
A world with no cities, no languages, no names, only wind and cold and time. Some call the ice fragile.
Others call it powerful. It is both. It moves slowly, but it sculpts continents.
It freezes gently, but it can grind mountains to dust. And now, as its ancient prisoners rise from the cold to meet a warming world, we are reminded that the past is never truly gone.
It merely waits.
If you strip away the forests, the rivers, the snow, if you peel back the skin of the earth, what you find beneath the world's tallest peaks is not just stone, but memory.
The mountains are bones, not of beasts or men, but of the planet itself. They rise like monuments to deep time, immense, ancient, indifferent. Each ridge and crack, each fold and fracture, is a record of pressure, collision, and force beyond imagination. Mountains are not born peacefully.
They are the result of trauma where tectonic plates crash together, buckling the Earth's crust like the hood of a car in a slow-motion accident. The Himalayas, for example, still rise today.
The Indian plate continues its relentless push into the Eurasian plate, forcing rocks skyward inch by inch. And within that towering wall of stone lie fossils of marine creatures, evidence that these giants were once ocean floor.
Imagine that, the roof of the world, once teeming with ancient fish and shelled life, now frozen and gasping for air at 8,000 meters. But the bones of the mountains do not merely lie still.
They grind, creak, and groan.
Earthquakes are their restless
Movements,
avalanches, their sudden shivers.
and sometimes They bleed when melting glaciers send torrents of water crashing down valleys, eroding their ancient flanks like veins opened by time. Step into the Alps or the Rockies, and the rocks speak in layers: shale, granite, gneiss.
You can see where heat once folded them, twisted them like cloth under immense weight.
Some stones still carry the signature of fire that deep mantles raw frozen in volcanic glass. Others shimmer faintly from minerals, compressed over epochs into fragile crystalline veins, and just like bones in a body, mountains heal and break and shift.
Landslides tear at their sides.
Glaciers scrape their surfaces raw.
Rain digs gullies through their roots. Yet they endure.
They grow older, but they don't vanish.
Even as they weather and crumble, their presence looms. Humans have always looked at mountains with a mixture of reverence and fear. We call them sacred.
We climb them.
We carve roads through them and tunnels beneath.
We build monasteries on their cliffs, observatories on their peaks, and sometimes entire civilizations in
their shadows.
But the mountains do not care. They are witnesses, not participants. They've seen ages of ice and ages of fire. They've stood through the birth of languages, the collapse of empires, the march of species now gone.
Some mountain ranges like
the Appalachians are so ancient they once rivaled the Himalayas in height, only to be worn down over hundreds of millions of years into gentle, forested hills. Time flattened them, eroded their pride, but not their wisdom. Even now, within the bones of these mountains, there are secrets.
Hidden cave systems stretching for miles.
Subterranean rivers that have never seen sunlight.
Crystals growing in pitch dark.
Stillness. Creatures adapted to total blackness, surviving without eyes or pigment. And sometimes bones, real ones, of extinct mammals, of humans who vanished in snowstorms or fell into crevasses never to return. Geologists say a mountain is always telling a story. You just need to know how to read the lines. But it's not only geologists who listen. Poets, mystics, wanderers, they've all stood before mountains and felt something unspoken. Not just awe, but insignificance. As if the earth is whispering back, you are temporary. I am not, and yet even the greatest peaks will one day fall.
Given enough time, erosion will flatten Everest, just as it did the ranges before.
The bones of the mountains, too, return to the earth, ground into sand, washed into rivers, buried in oceans,
only to rise again in some far-off age, in a different shape, under a different sky, because the planet is not static.
It breathes, shifts, dreams.
What seems solid is only momentarily still.
The mountains we see today are just the latest incarnation of a cycle that spans billions of years, a cycle of upheaval and stillness, of death and rebirth, written not in words but in stone. And so the mountains watch. They do not move quickly,
but they remember everything, high in the silence where the clouds begin to thin. Trees still cling to the earth like ancient monks in meditation. Their roots anchored in rock, their branches stretched toward the heavens. They are the oldest witnesses to both sky and stone.
These are not just trees. These are timekeepers dot in the shadowed valleys below. Forests may grow dense and green, teeming with life, but the trees that climb the slopes, those that dare to reach the line where oxygen thins and storms begin, are something else entirely. They are twisted, hardened, patient.
Their bark thickens like armor.
Their needles or
leaves shrink to preserve moisture. Their growth is slow, sometimes a mere few millimeters a year, and yet they live longer than almost anything else on Earth.
Some of the oldest known trees, like the bristlecone pines of North America, are over 4,800 years old. They've stood since the pyramids were young. Imagine the sunrises they've seen, the winters they've endured, the countless birds that have nested in their limbs before flying away forever. Up here, trees do not simply grow.
They endure.
Bent by wind, baked by sun, iced by frost, they
twist into surreal sculptures, bony silhouettes etched against thin blue air.
Some are broken, missing limbs, split by lightning.
Yet still they live, holding tight to their little ledge of life. Their roots search endlessly for purchase in the rock, gripping crevices with a tenacity that defies gravity. Their needles drink fog when water is scarce.
Their trunks hollow with time, yet remain alive, a paradox of decay and resilience, and they speak in a way.
Through chemicals in the soil, through scent on the wind. When one is wounded, the others know.
They alter their defenses, preparing for what's coming. This is no passive forest. It's a network,
a wooden cathedral with a mind of its own. Scientists
now know that trees communicate underground through fungal threads, mycorrhizal networks exchanging nutrients, sending distress signals, even nurturing their young. The forest, especially at high altitude, is not a group of individuals. It is a living organism with countless hearts beating slowly in wooden cages. When you walk through these elevated woods, you may feel watched not by animals, but by the trees themselves.
As if they are weighing you, not with malice or warmth, but simply with awareness.
You are a moment to them, a flicker. They have seen thousands like you pass through and fade. Some mountains, like those of Patagonia or the Himalayas, hold forests so dense with mist and moss that they seem otherworldly. Others, like the Andes or the Sierra Nevada, have wind-battered trees that grow sideways, like crooked teeth against the sky.
And in all of them, the higher you go, the more the trees become sparse, gnarled, ancient. Eventually, you reach the
tree line, the invisible boundary beyond which no tree can survive. It's a hard limit, set not by distance, but by temperature, wind, and exposure. Below it, the world still breathes green. Above it, only grass, rock, snow, and yet some trees cheat this boundary.
Some stretch higher than they should, growing solitary in places no others dare.
These are the dreamers, the rebels. They do not live long, but they live bravely, stretching their roots into frostbitten soil just to lift their leaves into sunlight.
No one else can touch. These trees drink the sky. They pull clouds through their needles, gather sunlight in silence, trap wind in their branches.
They do not rush. They do not move.
But they transform the world.
With each breath,
They take in carbon and release oxygen.
with each root, they hold the soil in place.
With each fallen leaf, they feed the world below, and they die slowly.
Sometimes from fire, sometimes from beetles.
Sometimes simply from time.
And when they fall, they do not vanish.
Their bodies become nurse logs, feeding fungi, sheltering insects, giving birth to new life.
In death, they become forests again. Humans have carved paths through them, built cabins within them, written poetry beneath their shade. And still, they grow.
Quietly, unmoved by our admiration or our destruction. They are older than us.
They will outlast us. Some trees at high elevations hold scars from lightning strikes, from war, from ancient fires.
Yet they keep growing.
A
Branch will bend away from damage and form a new shoot. A trunk split in two may still carry green at the crown to the mountains. The trees are clothing, living skin that thickens and thins with the seasons.
and to the sky. They are ambassadors offering life where none should flourish. As next time you see a tree on a high ridge, alone against the wind, remember it is not lost. It is not struggling. It is not weak. It is older than your bloodline.
And it stands where no one else could, drinking the sky with every silent breath.
There is a moment in the life of every species, every civilization, when its collective voice begins to fade not through catastrophe or war, but through the soft erosion of time. The slow forgetting that comes when words are no longer passed down.
It is at this juncture that we find ourselves, staring back through the long corridor of time toward that threshold between memory and myth, between the known and the unknowable, where stories begin to blur, and all that remains are fragments,
Scattered like broken pottery in a forgotten cave. Imagine a twilight world, not ancient in the geological sense, but ancient in the human one.
a world only slightly removed from our own, and yet so distant we cannot reach it without imagination.
The glaciers have mostly receded now.
The oceans have begun to find their new shorelines.
The air is warmer, the days longer, and everywhere.
Early humans are waking up not just in the biological sense, but in the existential one.
They are beginning to remember things they've never seen, to feel the tug of meaning in the night sky, to wonder not just how, but why. In this time, perhaps 20,000 to 10,000 years ago, we begin to see the signs.
Burial sites filled with ochre,
Beads and animal bones, clear signs of ritual and reverence.
caves with handprints and stags painted in earthy reds and blacks, not simply for decoration, but for connection. Music made from bone flutes, echoing in chambers where firelight danced on limestone. These were not mere acts of survival.
They were the beginnings of memory, and yet, it is here at this very threshold that we also encounter a paradox. For
Every piece of evidence we've uncovered, there are 1,000 more lost.
entire languages, entire cosmologies, entire civilizations that may have emerged and disappeared without ever etching their names into stone.
What we have inherited is not the full story, but a patchwork quilt with most of its threads missing.
And the silence between those threads, those are the ghosts of cultures we will never know. This era is not the age of writing.
It is the age of remembering without words. Oral traditions pass from one mouth to another like sacred fire.
Elders tell stories that were told to them, shaping the identities of people who have no flags, no empires, no cities.
Their nations are rivers and forests. Their history is held in songs that drift across valleys and echo in mountain passes.
And those songs, unwritten, unpreserved, are the first to vanish. Consider the idea that advanced cultures may have emerged before we traditionally assume.
We now know that complex social structures existed long before agriculture, as seen in Göbekli Tepe, a megalithic site over 11,000 years old, with T-shaped pillars carved with animals and abstract symbols. There are no houses, no permanent dwellings, just
a monumental center that suggests ceremonial significance.
who built it? Why?
What gods did they worship? What myths did they believe?
We may never know.
But the implications are clear. Memory preceded writing, and complexity preceded permanence. As the climate stabilized, humans began to settle. Agriculture bloomed along rivers, first in the Fertile Crescent, then in the Indus Valley, the Yellow River, the Nile.
With crops came granaries, and with granaries came record keeping.
The need to remember now took physical form. Clay tablets, etched with proto-cuneiform, tally sticks marked with notches, pictographs scratched into stone. This was the beginning of history as we define it, the moment memory became architecture. But even here, the past remains elusive. Writing is fragile. Parchment burns. Clay shatters.
Stone erodes.
And so, for every tablet found, there are libraries lost, entire lifetimes of thought gone in a flood, a fire, a war, or simply the passage of time. The Library of Alexandria is only the most famous example.
Countless others have disappeared.
Without even a whisper, the threshold of memory is not a line, but a vast and shifting frontier. It extends across continents and millennia.
It exists wherever people began to think of themselves as part of something larger: tribes, clans, nations, gods. Memory was not just about survival anymore.
It was about legacy, and yet, for all we have learned, we are haunted by what we do not know. What was the first myth ever told?
The first song sung under the stars? The first name given to the moon? These questions, once asked, live on in us like echoes in a deep cavern.
They are not just academic, they are spiritual. For to forget where we come from is to forget who we are. One could say we are still standing
at this threshold.
Even now, we are losing languages every year.
Wisdom that once guided people through monsoons and droughts, wisdom that mapped the stars without telescopes, is disappearing as elders die and stories go untold.
In the digital age, we may have more data than ever, but memory, the kind carried in the soul, is slipping away. Somewhere in a Pacific island village, an old woman remembers how her mother sang to the waves to call the fish. In a South American forest, a shaman recalls the plants that speak in dreams. In a Central Asian plain, a herder tells stories of sky spirits to a child who may never pass them on. These are not fairy tales. They are the remnants of a world that once lived entirely through memory. This is why the threshold matters.
Because it is not behind us. It is beneath us, around us, within us. Every story we save, every name we remember, pulls one thread back
from the abyss.
And every silence we accept grows the shadow a little deeper dot in the end. To stand at the threshold of memory is to recognize both the vastness of what we've inherited and the fragility of what we might lose. It is to honor those who came before by listening carefully for their voices hidden in stones, whispered in winds, sung in lullabies that no longer have words, and it is to accept the responsibility that comes with remembering. For memory, once passed on, becomes a gift,
a torch, a seed, and from that seed, perhaps, something eternal may grow. They say we are the only species that remembers, and perhaps that's true not just in the ways we document or archive, but in how we carry memory in our bones, in our myths, in the restless yearning to understand where we came from.
The human story is not just one of survival, but of reflection.
We do not merely exist, we remember existing.
And in remembering, we shape the very meaning of what it means to be human. This chapter isn't a conclusion. It's a mirror. We revisit the echoes of all that came before, the shadows of Lucy in the highlands of Ethiopia, the whispers of firelit nights beneath Neanderthal caves, the ancient migrations written in stone and salt, in gins and dreams.
All the roads we've walked,
all the versions of us that didn't make it, all the close calls, the broken branches on our evolutionary tree, they live in us still. Somewhere behind the eyes that look into the stars is the memory of forests,
of fear, of forging tools with trembling hands. To be human is to forget and remember again and again. In this final journey,
We look not only back, but forward. Evolution didn't stop with fire or language or cities. It continues in algorithms, in artificial intelligence, in synthetic biology, in the quiet decisions we make every day about what kind of species we want to be. Our memory is now embedded in machines, in satellite transmissions, in the vast, invisible cloud of digital consciousness that pulses across the planet. But what good is memory if it doesn't change us? We are, perhaps for the first time in history, creatures aware not just of our past, but of the possibility of having no future. We know we are fragile. We know we've teetered at the edge before. We know extinction is not just something that happened to the others, and so we remember, not just through history books or documentaries or DNA sequencing, but through empathy, through art, through the silent rituals of burial and storytelling, through the questions we ask our children and the stars we still map with wonder our ancestors left behind bones and fire pits. We leave behind data, a flood of it, but beyond the numbers, beyond the archives, lies something else. A pattern, a narrative,
A heartbeat. We are the species who asks, what if?
What if we never left the trees?
What if we vanish like the Denisovans? What if we forget who we were? What if we
Forget how to be. This chapter, the last one, is a challenge to remember better, to evolve not just in form, but in mind, to see not just what we've become, but what we could become if we remembered the long road behind us,
if we honored the fragile line that led from stardust to story, because in the end, we're not just the product of natural selection.
We're the product of reflection, a species that remembers, and perhaps, just perhaps that's what will
save us. So now, after tracing millions of years in just moments,
after walking beside shadows and fire, bones and dreams,
you've arrived here still, breathing, remembering. This was not just a history lesson. It was a memory.
Your memory. Ours. A long echo from a planet that has whispered to us across the ages in stone, in silence, in starlight. If this journey stirred something inside you, a flicker of awe, a thread of belonging, a sense that
you're part of something impossibly vast, then leave a comment below.
Tell us where you listened from, and when,
the time, the place, the mood.
Because this moment is part of the story too. Subscribe to Sleepster for more deep journeys
into earth, time, and everything in between.
And if your eyes are heavy now,
let them close. The earth will remember, and so will you.